I just wasn't ready. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to another episode of Heavy Metallurgy's Wednesday Album Club. And, of course, my co-host for the evening. We got Morbid Crank, Jim from Eihwaz Recordings. We got TJ up there in the corner, Splenium for Nyktophobia from Glorious Dead. And, of course, Kellen from Killing for Company. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me again for another, hopefully, fun discussion. How are we all doing?
Doing great. Happy to be back.
Good.
Ready to talk about some Swedish death metal.
Did TJ's camera freeze right at the most happy time ever?
I did.
He's got a big shit-eating grin on his face.
He does, dude. He kind of looks really scary like that.
He does. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like seeing him frozen in happiness like that. It's just not right.
He's hiding a hatchet behind his back right now.
Something.
It's a Swedish death metal evening. That's what happens.
Right?
That's right.
TJ, if you can hear us, you might need to jump out and jump back in. But before we start, thank you, everybody. These Wednesday shows have been catching on a little bit, which is cool. Still, between 20 and 30% of you all that tune in aren't necessarily subscribed. So it'd be cool if you subscribed. That would help out the channel quite a bit. What's up, Chris? Hey, John. Frosty, I hope everything's good with your folks in the hospital. Hang in there. Everybody, hello. I picked last week this album here, Splenium for Nyktophobia. And a little brief history. Let me get TJ back in here. There he is. Uncanny formed around 1991 out of the ashes of the band Cicatrication in Avesta in Dalarna, Sweden. And over the course of 4 years, released 2 demos, 2 splits, and the full-length album, Splenium for Nyktophobia. The band disappeared. I don't know if they broke up or what the deal was, but reformed around 2008, and now have added a comp, 2 EPs, and a split to their catalog. Still no follow-up to the full-length, and they don't seem like a very prolific band. But Splenium for Nyktophobia. First impression. We'll start with Kellen, just because we'll start with Kellen.
Yeah, classic Swedish death metal. I kind of knew what I was getting into here, but also was not disappointed, I guess. The first, especially, this is the first time for me listening to this record. I'm familiar with the band, and by the first 3 songs, I was, completely on board. We'll get into some of the other song choices later on, but there's some curveballs on this record that caught me off guard. But besides that, classic Swedish death metal, enjoyed it. So we'll kind of get into the details later. But initial impression, if you love Swedish death metal, this record's going to work for you.
Right on. How about you, Jim?
A great palate cleanser for me from last week.
I knew. I had your back.
And you did. It was just what the doctor ordered. Obviously, we all love 90s death metal from across the pond and a little north, and so this does that. But I think there's plenty of tweaks there where it didn't just kind of fade into the background for me. I was like Kellen, unfamiliar with this band, so it was a pleasant surprise. And for me to hear those, tweaks on the style that I think made them, unique, and to the point where I really didn't want to write, about the band. I wanted to just listen to it, because I always, like, as you guys know, I take a lot of notes when I'm listening, for these shows, and I really just didn't want to. I really just wanted to enjoy it. So I think that really kind of says something, about where it sits with me, for the kind of songwriting they do, for the kind of sound they produce, where I was like, I didn't want to analyze it. I just wanted to fucking, to rock out to it, and sorry about the early F-bomb, Maria. No, it's not.
That's all right. Wait, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's all good. Cool. TJ.
Yeah, me too. I thought I had this I rifled through my collection a couple times. I could have swore I'd had this, but I guess I don't unless the possums got it or something. I don't know. Many miscellaneous creatures live out here, but yeah, this is. I mean, it's what you expect it to be, and it's cool. It's my first impression of it the first time I heard it was like, I stumbled across this online somewhere and was just like, where in the heck did this band? Where were they all this time? And then of course there's like no output by them and everything else, so it was kind of okay. That might explain that, but there wasn't any real surprises in any of this for me. But it was in so much that it was when the first time I heard it, I was surprised, how cool it was and how it just kind of flew under the radar all these years. So in that sense, I suppose definitely possums are cult, except for the one that ate a hole through my roof. That little bastard and I are gonna have some words, but yeah, no, this is it was definitely cool record, and Kellen was alluding to some stuff on here that kind of hangs out in left field a little bit. We could talk about that as we move down I have a few things, but by and large, my first impressions of this have been really were really cool, and I do like this, and I'm probably going to end up picking it up if I don't dig it out of my record collection here.
All right. Well, for me, I can't remember when I heard it back in the day. I got this tape trading, a copy of it tape trading. A friend stuck it on the end of a cassette and liked it instantly. But listening back to it here this last couple weeks, I think it's kind of sad this band never really took off. I mean, they're not an HM2 Swedish death metal band. They just sound exactly like the area. A little late, but not too late. They're still kind of in the thick of things. But it's kind of the perfect mix because Swedish death metal always did have a bit of a punk side to it. There's a little bit of punk mixed in. And this album has got a couple tracks, Enkelbiljetten and Sprang Skitten. Both of those are very punk tracks, and we'll get into that stuff later. But I like that mix of kind of nodding and appreciation, probably where they came from, and not reinventing the wheel here, although they do experiment a bit towards the end. That could have been their producer too. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I've always liked this band, and I was listening to it with a friend here a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, I'm picking this for album club. This album just does not get the love, even though it was reissued on The Crypt in Dark Descent. So Ted and Matt gave it their treatment and did a really good job on it. Dark Descent did the CD with a bunch of bonus tracks. Their demos and all that stuff are on here as well. So these should be easy to track down. But yeah, I was thumbs up. I love Swedish death metal, and these guys definitely fit within their geographical realm, but sonically, but they're doing some cool stuff that might have set them a little bit apart too. But before I threw out this idea here, I thought it'd be kind of cool to look at what was going on in Sweden around 1994 when this record came out. So we've got 1994, Entombed. This came out in 93. So Entombed were probably touring this album, Wolverine Blues. They're very much transitional. Well, very transitional, more groovy rock-based death metal. You've got also, this came out in 93 as well, Dismembers and Decent and Obscene, which 94, they're probably touring around doing some stuff too. This album rules. 1993, again, another transitional, this is probably another tour year for this band. Grave, Stockholm, Soulless, their third album. And again, they're kind of following the Entombed motif. They're getting a little more groovy. I love this record though. This did come out in 94 and features Dan Swano, who recorded Uncanny. We've got Spectral Sorrows by Edge of Sanity. In a lot of ways, Uncanny remind me of Edge of Sanity, the earlier stuff. I mean, big time, especially the way Dan produced it and stuff. It was recorded at Unisound. Also, another transitional album. This is 93, and they're touring for 94. This is Cross the Open Sea by Unleashed. This is kind of a transitional record for me. I don't love this record. I like a couple songs. The two before it are much better. Another band that could maybe be lumped in with Uncanny, you got Therion, but at this point, the Symphony Masses, Hodrak, and Homegas, they're starting to get weird. I mean, this band ended up being really symphonic and bizarre. This is still clinging to some harsh vocals and whatnot, but the writing's on the wall. Things are getting strange. And then this came out in 93, the debut album from Catatonia, Dance of December Souls. This isn't necessarily death metal. It's a little bit more black and doom feel. But again, it's just I just wanted to kind of pick a smattering of what was going on in Sweden at the time and ask, even though Uncanny landed in the thick of things, judging by the progression of all the heavy hitters I just shown you guys in their careers and catalog, was Splenium for Nyktophobia too late to the party to make an impact? Was it the fact that their Greek label Unisound Records suffer from a lack of distribution in the States, or did the band just not have the chops or the secret sauce to compete? What do you think? We'll start with you, Jim.
Well, at the time when this stuff was hitting, I was, far more listening to American death metal, and I did have, the Earache major label releases of Entombed and all that kind of stuff. So, I wasn't like around enough to that scene, where I could, say with, accuracy what was going on. But what I will say is listening to this and seeing that, Frederick Norman, who was also in Catatonia, is in this band, guitar player. I'm kind of wondering if, they only, as we know that, like you mentioned earlier, they had a bunch of demos and splits, but only one real full length, and which was this one. And maybe part of the band's momentum suffered, not for being on a kind of a smaller label, but also maybe he was dividing his interest and time into Catatonia, which I think their record was right after this one came out or something.
Wait a minute. What are you saying, that Uncanny and Catatonia had a shared member?
Yeah, Frederick Norman. Yeah.
Oh, I thought that Frederick Norman guy was in October Tide.
He's in the October Tide too, but he was in Catatonia from 94 to 2009.
Okay, right on.
Yeah, Brave Murder Day and Discouraged Ones.
You did a little more homework than I did. Right on. Cool.
Yeah, so that's just kind of my guess is maybe there was some, differing priorities there. And I mean, all of us that have been in bands, we know how that can kind of, slow the momentum some. But like I said, that's just pure conjecture on my part, as we're talking about like why they may not have made as much of an impact. And I will say also, I think there's enough difference here. Like you mentioned earlier, Marty, there's no way HM2, these guys, they kind of have their own sound, but they do pull a lot of from bands, around them and from bands that came before.
Yep.
I still think they tweaked it enough to make it their own, and I really like it. And like TJ, I want to buy this, but maybe it wasn't quite different enough in the context of what was going on and all the kind of like, evolutionary sounds that were going on. Maybe it wasn't quite enough to punch through. But what's cool about it is it's an undiscovered, nugget, that you brought to my attention. And I'm glad you did, because I really enjoy it.
Cool. Kellen.
Well, this is a little bit of the tell me what it was like back in the 90s, Grandpa, like moment.
Get to the point, Sonny.
You son of a bitch.
So, because I'm very much, speculating here. I would say that, I'm curious, this sound for Swedish death metal by 94, would you say the tide has started to turn in terms of what the focus is for death metal? I'm just completely open-ended, but like, I don't know if it was becoming more technical, more progressive by 94. And that's kind of my read on it. And then you have the same time a certain shift within to sort of black metal becoming the focus. Maybe that hadn't quite happened here in the States by 94, but I would say in Europe, it's probably taking a bit more shape. So the one other thing I'd probably want to bring up is just like the general, like if it's distraction to Jim's point with other projects, but the lack of output Like I think it'd be hard to develop any sense of momentum with a single release and sort of what sort of doesn't follow it. As good as this record is, in my opinion, to when you compare it to all the classics you just pulled out, is it really going to be the one that people gravitate towards? For true connoisseurs, and that'll kind of be part of my closing thoughts here, is like for true connoisseurs who absolutely love Swedish death metal, yeah, it's great to sort of set themselves apart in a way that would compete with the larger names. I don't think it's quite on that level yet. So probably at least not after one record. You'd have to 2 or 3 records to develop the kind of notoriety to stand in the same sort of pillar as the rest of the bands that you mentioned. So,
well, out of all those bands I showed, there was only one band still towing the older school Swedish death metal line, and that was Dismember. I mean, even Grave got groovy. That Soulless record is a very groovy. Entombed was kind of the litmus paper for that whole scene. A lot of bands followed, Desultory or Desultory, however you say their name. A lot of bands followed suit and got more groovy. So I hear that Uncanny is kind of a salute to the old school.
But wouldn't you say also like that Edge of Sanity became a bit more adventurous sonically?
More proggy.
Yeah, right. Like I just feel it's interesting to see how by 94 death metal starts to expand into different territories.
Yep.
Where I feel this record is sort of like a great sort of encapsulation of different sides of Swedish death metal. So,
right on. How about you, TJ?
Well, I think really they're kind of a sum of the parts of what was really going on in Sweden. The punk stuff. I mean, a lot of those bands all had that going on. All the Discharge riffs and
they all Left Hand Path was full of punk
full
vibe,
of that stuff, and it's it's all kind of coming from the same place. And these guys obviously were just a part of that scene. Could whether or not they would have punched through. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here, like you said. I even have in my notes. It's like they didn't reinvent any wheels on this record, but there's definitely enough interesting stuff going on here, unique ideas, and taking some chances with some stuff that really could have set them apart eventually had they been more prolific, had they managed to put out any more material. I think it was just really kind of a culmination of things. You got a label that's not really got any reach, and then you're not putting out any material, and then the guys lose interest, and what are you left with, really? So right. Yeah, it's but as far as what they're trying to do, I mean, they competing. I mean, look at what was coming out, and according to Wikipedia, so Purgatory Afterglow came out in 94.
Yep.
And like you say, and then you got Crimson that comes, and that, I mean, that, here you have this 40-minute song.
Kind of a masterpiece. I think that's a masterpiece record. I love it.
It's in perpetual rotation for me, at least once a year. Man, just so much. Anyway, so it's like with that, and then For Victory came out in 94, which of course isn't Swedish, but the peers, contemporaries, what have you. It's like,
keep your shirt on, Jim. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I feel you, brother. My tits are staying in my shirt, but still, I feel your passion, bro. But you haven't lived till you see Jim headbang over the bonfire to bolt throw.
With his titties glistening in the bonfire. Yeah, beautiful.
That's
air
beautiful.
Guitar, left-handed air guitar, and perpetual headbanging.
Yep, he's conjuring his inner. He's conjuring his inner Joe Bench.
Best bass sound ever been.
Yeah, for sure. But that being said, I mean, so like, I think it's as good as a lot of things that were coming out, like we talked before, and this was really reminding me of stuff like Comic-Con and the first Merciless record, the French Merciless, Abject Offerings. There's a lot of stuff going on here that I really found to be very similar in sound and style in a lot of ways, in a good way. And so, they were definitely, on par with their contemporaries in the same kind of rung in the status of, the hierarchy of the best bands versus whatever middle tier or what have you. I think, given the chance, and a little bit more support, they definitely, and, you know, being in 94, they still had time, you know, they could have really made a bigger impact and, you know, and done more with what they were trying to do. So I think the potential was there.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that was said. I think the biggest part of it was the label. I mean, if they were on Earache or Nuclear Blast, it might have been a little bit different story. I mean, would they have been huge? No, but they could have been on tour with, you know, opening for Grave or on some bigger shows, getting out there a little bit. But their sound isn't off the mark. I just think they're saluting the earlier era of the Swedish death metal sound. But there's some cool little hooky dissonance things going on. Some of the riffs that set them a little bit apart. You got to listen for it, but it's there. They're doing some cool stuff. And of course the production is, I think is excellent, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that here in a minute, but let's discuss the musicality and composition of Splenium for Nyktophobia. TJ, we'll start with you.
I think I like it that, you know, they go off and they get a little angular in places, but they still they keep the songs tight. You know, they really seem to know what they want to sound like, what they're trying to do. You know, the songs and the composition doesn't feel confused in general. There's a couple spots that we'll get into, but some of the electronic moments, but by and large, I think that they're doing a really good job. They don't, it doesn't strike me as, you know, immature, as some of the stuff that had come out at the time, you know, that, you know, they were definitely, trying to do something, you know, that was solid and developing their style a little bit, you know, while still, you know, borrowing from the things that influence them, like we all do all the time. You know, it's definitely cool. The record has its own vibe. You know, they don't really sound like anybody. Well, it's like, sure, I pick up, and for me, I'm always listening to stuff and like, what does this remind me of? It's just a bad habit I have. You know, it's not always fair to the band. You know, it's like, just listen to it for its own merits, but it's just, I always want to kind of dive deep and like, well, you know, where'd they get that idea from, and where'd this come from? You know. So, but I think by and large, it's really well put together. I think they did a good job with it.
Okay, Kellen.
Yeah, I agree with the sort of simplicity of their sort of the constraints that they're working under. Most of the songs, I think, come under 4 minutes. So that punk like D beat ethic is all over this record, which totally makes sense, right? So there's your Grave and Tomb stuff, and then there's also like little melodic flares to this. So there's hints of the sort of Gothenburg sound coming on this record. It never gets to the extent though where it feels like either one of those schools dominates the sound here. Like there's enough sort of shared of the recipe between the two schools. You know, there's less predictable, like I don't want to say more metal, but like they get away from sort of a lot of the mid-paced D-beat groove at times where it becomes a bit more complex in terms of the songwriting, but it doesn't stay there very long, right? We move back to something memorable that is going to, you know, provide some hooks to the song. So that being said, like I loved there's the song. I think the one that really stood out was a cover actually. So the
Jiang's.
Yeah, that cover, like you could tell that is absolutely a crust punk song. And
weren't a Japanese hardcore band? Let me look.
I think there's a Swedish crust.
Oh, okay, that could be.
I could be wrong, but anyway, like that part of this record was probably the most interesting, just because it proved how much they were sort of true to a like punk D-beat side, while still retaining enough sort of creativity to the way they were writing their riffs. But once again, like then there's going to be this melodic soloing that happens. There's some extended solos where they take their time and they don't just breeze right through them and make them meaningless. So it was a cool little balance of their sort of talents that they understand. By 94, a lot of other major bands have developed what Swedish death metal is, and they're kind of piecing together different ideas. But yeah, it's outside of that, like a diverse yet completely coherent kind of style of songwriting.
Right on. Jim.
Yeah, the musicality is a great balance of, to Kellen's point, simplicity and technicality here. These guys, they're playing the riffs over the D beats, some kind of like things we may have heard before. And there's even some early Carcass style riffs I hear on here, some simpler moments of Demolik on here. There's I hear Finnish stuff. It actually inspired me to listen to some Finnish stuff after listening to this. But what makes it different though is they're not just playing single note scales or drop tune, power chords. You hear thirds in there, you hear fifths in there. And and it's like that, those little flourishes of chord changes that give it that evil tonality, like just here and there. Like a lot of black metal uses triads or whatever, and that you hear that in just little spurts here, and that those little bits of color. I think someone actually had a better way of putting it. I saw in the chat, but that's what makes this record for me, actually, because I love that they are definitely firmly within the style of Swedish death metal, but those little bits of color that they do with their chord selections really I think is what a differentiator for these guys, and shows that they I won't say the guy's going to play in Gorguts anytime soon, but I can tell you that these guys are actually really solid guitar players and have some really cool ideas. One minor criticism in terms of the musicality is I noticed that on the blasts the snares go a little quiet, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when that happens, because it means the guy isn't hitting as hard. You know what I mean? and that's cool, but if you're not hitting as hard all the time, then I think and you're going that fast, it kind of takes me out of it a little bit as a listener. But having said that, just so we're clear, I'd rather listen to old Bolt Thrower than Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater any day. So that shows you, I'm cool with simple drumming. You know what I mean? It's a minor criticism, because besides that, his fill work and his double bass, everything else was all over the place. But since we're I'll liken this to Top Chef. You watch Top Chef, they're like, well, everything was great, but we have to nitpick something to death because that's our job. I mean, that's kind of what I'm feeling here, is I have to, we're talking about musicality, so I kind of had to bring out that. It just kind of bugged me a little bit. But other than that, though, I think the musicianship was top notch. They did some really surprising things, but stayed death metal, and for this kind of music, I wanted it to stay in that lane, and it did so when they the little bits of exploration in terms of range of sound that they perpetuated in this never jumped the rails for me, and I kudos to them for those choices.
All right. For me, I wrote down. I'm always curious. You start getting into the early '90s. How old are these dudes? And I wrote down immature or structurally adventurous. That's what it kind of boils down to for me. But as I was listening to the first track, Elohim, the structure, that song, probably one of my favorite ones on the album. It's a great song to put up front. It's kind of like their Override the Overture, not in tone or fierceness, but the fact that there's a lot of weird things coming in and out, but they kind of swing it back around. It's just a really cool structure, atypical structure of the song, and that kind of it permeates the rest of the album, other than a track here or there. They're quite good at not just falling into verse chorus, bridge, verse chorus. They spice these tracks up, which is what really kept my attention going throughout this entire album. Towards the end, they kind of run out of gas a little bit, but the top half of this record, really well structured. I know what you're saying about the blast beats, but man, the production, we'll get into that here in a second, but I really love the sound of this record, and that's another thing that really kept me trained on it. It just sounds period correct, if that makes sense. It sounds like it was recorded in the 90s. It's recorded really well. It really allows, I mean, that clean, there's like a clean bass sound, and you can hear it ringing out in there. And I know Jim is more of a distorted bass guy, but that clean bass, it just somehow it really works in this mix somehow. It just, you can hear it. It adds something to it. It adds a bit of heaviness in a weird way. There's just, it's really cool how everything comes together on this record. I just like the way the songs are written. I like the sound. It's, like I said, period correct. I definitely dig it. Let's get into the production, which I will say was recorded at Unisound Recordings in October 93. If it's Unisound, before Unisound, it was Gory Sound, I believe. But Dan changed it to Unisound. So it sounds like it was recorded. It didn't say Dan Swano, but I'm assuming it was recorded by Dan Swano. I didn't read any of the liner notes. So, yeah. So what did you guys think of the production? Jim, we'll go back to you again.
Thanks, Marty, because I actually wanted to jump in and say, like, just so we're clear, like, my ding on, like, you know, the kind of holding back on the snare during the blast was definitely not a production ding. It was a you know, stylistic choice thing, or maybe even like a musical limitation, but definitely not a production. I don't think that was it. You know, it was a drummer's choices, and you know, whatever, for whatever reason. But yeah, I agree with you. I really like the production here. We got great thick guitar tone, but it's not HM2, which I loved. You know, because you know, so many bands do it, and we're doing it their time, still doing it today. Not that I don't love an HM2. I've played through an HM2 on bass, as you know, Marty, and you know, that's, and I love the sound. You know, I love that chainsaw, buzzsaw guitar sound, but you know, it can get played out. And so these guys had their own. You know, I think they really had their own sound. You know, I for me, again, it was more akin to, you know, mid-period Carcass or Dimilik. I keep thinking Dimilik when I hear these guys, but not in terms of complexity, but just in terms of like some of the, if you take a Dimilik riff and you take out the odd time signatures and you play it in 4/4 like Death and Roll, then you got Uncanny. that's what I get from that. And so yeah, you know, you can hear everything really well. You know, the vocals are great mixed, and I love the guy's voice. He sounds to me like a cross between Barney Greenway and Carl Willits, and I love both of those vocalists. Yeah. So I mean, the fact that he's somehow, you know, whether he's doing it intentionally or not, kind of merging those two styles together, like it was really great to me. You know, I mean, you know, two of my favorites there. So it was awesome to hear that. So I love the way his vocals propel the music forward. You know, I think the drums do sound great. You know, that one issue, again, not production related, notwithstanding. And I think his performances actually were great. You know, besides that, I liked his style. I liked his choices, and the bass, I do like the clanginess of it, Marty. But you are right. I would have preferred it to be distorted. You know, I was like, man, if he had distorted that thing, it would have cut right through the mix a little bit better, because the guitar tone is very clean. You know, despite being thick, it's clean. You know, you can make out what's going on really well, which is, you know, a good thing. But I think that distorted bass would have filled it up a little bit more and pushed it. But you know, that's just me, personal taste. You know, and again, you know, less to do about production. So I think, you know, without the distortion there, I love that clangy sound, like, you know, like Dee Dee running from Overkill. Like, I love his bass sound.
Yeah,
it's the clangiest bass sound on the planet. It's like clang, 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 clang. Yep. You know, I love that. And I'm not saying he had to go that far, but I would have liked for him to have been pushed up in the mix. If he's not going to have distortion on the bass, to have to get that clang even more out there, to make it just sound really nasty. I would have preferred that the bass was up higher, you know, in the final mix, in where that element of his playing style could have been, you know, easier to listen to. I was kind of having to crank it a little bit to try to get more of that, you know. So, but all in all, again, you know, these are nitpicks. You know, I really like this record. You know, it's been a while since I didn't want to write anything down. I just wanted to enjoy something, and you know, this was that record for me. Like, I just didn't want to write about it. I just want to jam on it. So good. Yeah, good stuff. I mean, I think production, you know, for this time and era, it's spot on.
Okay, Kellen.
Well, I'm glad you clarified the drum sound there, Jim, because I was going to say that's like one of my favorite parts of this record.
The blast beats.
The
fast
specifically
parts. I do like the fast parts.
the snare sound on this record. There's enough of like a rattle inside that snare hit that works for me. It's not too tightly wound, so I really like. Well, I'm not really taking issue with the lack of strength during the blast section as much as I am. I just really enjoyed the snare sound on this record. So, or drum sound, broadly speaking, I don't have too much more to add in terms of enjoying this record in terms of its production. I do wonder, like, it's interesting to think about it. If I had heard an HM2 sound immediately, I don't know if I would have dismissed this record faster. Like it would have just been like, all right, I got another one of these to go through this week.
Yeah.
But now that I've heard it a handful of times, I'm kind of wondering what it would sound like with it. I don't know. It's a weird sort of question to have there. Yeah, but overall, it's a great sounding record. Nothing sounds diminished. Everything sounds well fleshed out. I can hear everything clearly. The vocal presence is a strong vocal performance, and I never felt like I had to choose between the size of the guitars or the presence of the vocalist, which is always, a key thing that I'll pay attention to. So I really have nothing more to add. It's a solid production, and one that is not like a purely derivative Swedish death metal sound. There's a little bit of personality to it, which probably makes it a bit more interesting for those who are Swedish death metal connoisseurs.
Right on. TJ.
Yeah, my biggest gripe with this, and it's not a huge. I wasn't super crazy about the guitar tone, but I like you've all kind of pointed out. Marty said, this record does vibe for the time, and it really does. It just smacks of the era it came out of, and the tone. It all just works inside of it. So my criticism is kind of a conflicted critique. It's like I don't hate it. I would have liked to have heard something a little bit more, deadly on it, but at the same time, everything is so well put together that and the songs are so kind of concise that it just works. So it's like, it's just kind of a nitpick more than anything else. Otherwise, I can't really add anything to what you're saying. I think, I'm reading here. It looks like, doesn't say Suano produced this, but he was a sound engineer on it, and then he did a guest solo on one of the tracks. And the more you kind of think about, you consider, it's like I think his hand was pretty heavy in the overall, to do of bringing this record through, because it just kind of shines all over it when you kind of put it in your head against the Edge of Sanity stuff and whatever. So, which makes sense, and it was, he did a hell of a job recording it, because I think had it not been for the production that they got out of this, the album could have really floundered or fell flat if somebody else had done it. They really brought it all together. So yeah, really, I'm pretty much with you guys, have a gush fest on it. The record sounds great.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote down great guitar, warm sound, perfect and thick drum sound. The drums are what really, and I really like these songs when they kick it fast, where the blast kicks in, because it's so clean. The drum sound doesn't lose its clarity or heaviness, even though the snare might be quieter. It's still, you could just really feel the intensity rolling off that kit. And Dan must have had people working at Unisound in there to keep up with, because he was super busy during this time, obviously. But it's funny. You look at the track listing, you got, towards the end of this album, there's like that weird industrial type of thing. And, the same year this came out, and towards the end, you've got the song Sacrificed, which is, basically Dan's love letter to Sisters of Mercy, which on a death metal record, it's like, what the hell is this? But it's still, I like that. I like Sisters of Mercy, but I listened to this album and it reminds me sonically of earlier Edge of Sandy, like Unorthodox, maybe even a little bit like the Spectral Sorrows in between those two records. And you could tell it was recorded at that studio. I like the guitar tone for the fact that it's not HM2. I like the fact that it's just heavy in its own way, but still sounds entirely Swedish death metal. It still sounds like a product of its, area, which is very cool. The vocals are set perfect in the mix. The guitars, you can hear the bass. I mean, I have zero complaints. It's like the sixth member of this band to me. I just really like the way this record sounds, and I wish more records today sounded like that. I just do. It just has a more real sound to it. Although I will say, when I was first listening to it a couple weeks ago, I'm like, this could be a Skogsberg Studio Sunlight production too, for the fact that it comes out later that the Swedish death metal Studio Sunlight drum sound was D drums. I heard that fact and my head exploded, knowing that they're going in there practicing on these youth center kits, and then they're going into Studio Sunlight and say, nope, you're using the D drums. That had to be a change. But I mean, drum sounds are always killer, and that's the first thing I thought of. I'm like, wow, this sounds like it could be a D drum thing. It just sounds so clear and good and heavy. But yeah, anyway, production, love it, great. I think it's awesome. Favorite, least favorite songs, TJ.
I definitely like all the fast stuff where they really, it's definitely cool. They do a good job. To me, and I picked up on where the parts where the blast kind of seems to kind of mellow out a little bit. And to me, it reminded me when the bands first started to bring the blast beats in, and they didn't, the drummers like the first time Cannibal Corpse put a blast beat on a record, and you can feel like he just kind of didn't know what he was trying to do, and he was just doing it, and you could always kind of feel the tempo struggle a little bit, and so the sound would kind of peter out a little bit, and that's what it kind of reminded me of. It wasn't bad. It just kind of reminded me of that, when the blast beats first started becoming a thing, and we were all kind of amazed by it, so it was just kind of cool, but a nostalgic kind of experience listening to the record. But yeah, I love the opening track. I can't read the Brain Access, Soul Incest, Toward the Endless Throne. Those tracks are just all really killer, just the blasting, whatever. And then my least, Timeless, the keyboard stuff on there kind of, I don't know, I didn't really care for it all that much. The song's not too bad, but the keyboards just seemed a little bit out of wonk to me. I don't know. And then that Lepra, that's that kind of godfleshy thing that's on here, which the Street Cleaner record, I love that shit, but it's like,
you did
Street Cleaner
color me a bit shocked.
Yeah, you didn't know. Oh yeah, I love that record, man.
I am a little surprised. A little surprised by that.
Yeah, oh man, I used to jam the shit out of that. But yeah, wow. Man,
I'm surprised.
Seriously. Yeah, this year is I just was kind of like, who is this for? It's so kind of out of place. It's not bad. It's just like thrown in there. It's such a random, and then the title track thing at the end. It's just, it sounds like, I can't think of his name. The ding dong that dresses up as a troll and gets. I don't know if it's not Mork. I don't remember. Mortis. Yeah, it's just weird, horrible, synthy. Legend of Zelda.
The ding dong that dances like a troll.
Not dances, dresses up, whatever comes out.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
I always love the story about Marty. It told me about him getting locked out of the venue in New York City and getting pelted by homeless people or whatever. He had to walk around the building to get back in or something.
He was all in his garb, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like a total freaking Spinal Tap moment for
Mhm.
Mortis. It's hilarious,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's kind of it. It's just for those tracks, just they kind of just a little out of place to me. It seems like the record would have been exceptionally fine without it, but obviously, they're doing their stuff and they wanted to inject that, and then hanging out with Swano and stuff. Doesn't really surprise me that they wanted to be like, well, hey, look at the cool keyboardy stuff we can do too, man, and whatever. So I get it for what it is, but I just kind of for me as far as that goes. But otherwise, yeah.
All right, Kellen.
I'm never gonna get that ding dong Mortis out of my head for the rest of the evening. Okay. So,
well, am I wrong? Ding dong.
You are not wrong. Not wrong. But I'm guessing you're not the biggest Dungeon Synth fan in the world as well.
Oh man, don't get me going.
I just learned today he liked Godflesh, so I'm
There we
like,
go.
who knows? I mean, he's got to
Win one, lose one. There you go.
He is the glorious swordsman, so it's hard to say what this guy.
I'm an enigma.
Yeah.
Okay, so favorite songs. First, so Elohim, the opening track. I love that they just get to work. Like the album starts and they just game on. So like that track a lot. Then the other ones that I really enjoyed were Brain Access and Towards the Endless Throne, which is funny because both of those precede the instrumentals. So it's like I felt like I got this momentum going, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what happened? Kind of, we don't sort of carry it. But I don't necessarily take issue with, or my biggest letdowns aren't the instrumentals on this record. I actually think that they're kind of cool. They're just kind of out of place, right? There's not enough of a cohesive theme for them to develop. Like if either one of those showed up multiple times on this record, like a single one of if Timeless had 2-3 spots where there was a major part of this band's identity. Same thing with Lepra. If we had like 2 or 3 tracks where they were sort of developing that, I'd kind of be more interested. But so I guess the final conflict, and I hear in my notes, it's the porno flute part 2 or 3. Do you have it on your notes? I'm guessing you've the record and the CD there, Marty. So
I didn't read anything about porno.
I
flute.
saw that online. It doesn't show up everywhere.
Well, anyway, the lyrical content has to do with there's a flute that everyone then has sex after listening to the flute. I don't know. It's like the lyrical content for the song. Good times.
Well,
but
I don't need a flute. But
yes,
anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, the final conflict, porno flute part 2.
Okay. Here we go. The professor chiming in with the skin flute. Thank you for the correction. But what I'll say is that song's, if I didn't know about the lyrical content, whatever, I wouldn't dislike the song, but it feels like just kind of a moot point. And then the closing sort of instrumental outro, the album just ends kind of flat for me.
Meh.
There we go. Perfectly. Could not have said it better.
Yeah.
Could not have said it. It just did not feel like it culminates anywhere meaningful. And I think that was probably my least favorite on the record.
That's the Pied Peter.
So that's all I got for songs there.
All right. Jim.
Well, I came into this with one of my favorite songs thinking I was going to be, the outlier, but I'm seeing in the comments several people have mentioned it as well. I actually really love the instrumental in this record. I love Timeless. I think it's awesome. Weird keyboards and all, man. I like the riffs. I like the acoustic overlays. I like there's some Sean Reinhardt style cynic drumming going on in the middle of it. There's just some really badass kind of string skipping death metal style riffs and really great solos. And now I know why, because TJ pointed out Dan Swano does one of the solos on this, and I bet that's my favorite one. I was like, wow, that solo was really awesome. And then when you said that, I'm like, oh, okay, that's probably why I like it so much.
Right.
But I just got to give these guys kudos for that, because usually instrumentals for me on a record, they're I'm always just kind of like ambivalent about it. You know, like, oh, okay, it's another instrumental. You know, there are exceptions, things that mean a lot to me, like Cosmic Sea on Death's Human album. You know, I really like Orion. You know, Stab Me, I don't care. I think it's great.
That's awesome.
But for
Great
but for
song.
most part, yeah, but exactly. But from a lot of for the most part, instrumentals I'm not super into. But I actually really dug it on this album, and I think the weirdness that's prevalent throughout that track kind of embodies who Uncanny is. I mean, their name is Uncanny, right? I mean, they're clearly death metal, but they have these weird little, you know, choices that they make, you know, as I alluded to earlier. Now, that said, they do get a little crazy here with Lepra, you know, the God flesh worshiping song. Hey man, I'm all about, yeah, let's listen to some God flesh, you know, let's do some industrial, but it did seem a little out of place here. Now what's weird though is it's well done. I think for that kind of sound, it's actually good, but I just didn't want to hear it on this record. I wanted to hear it somewhere else, you know. So that's probably, you know, one of my least favorites. And then, you know, I got to side with what everybody's saying. The title track is just too weird even for me. Like, I don't know what they were going for there. I got weird 80s horror movie sound mixed with a Super Nintendo game soundtrack. Like that's what I got out of that. You know, and it's kind of a bit too long too. And you know, Kel and I agree on one thing. We like for albums to start strong and to finish strong, and this is my most major criticism of the record. I don't think that was a strong finish. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think this album could have done without both of those, and it would have been completely fine, just as great of an album. Luckily, due to the brevity of the songs and how many there are on this record, there's so many other songs and there's so many other options. Even those two tracks don't weigh down my overall enjoyment of the record. Like I still want to get this. You know what I mean? Now, if this was a much shorter album, or if these songs were longer than they were, it might have turned the tide on me, like wanting to actually own a physical copy of this. You know what I mean? You know, so they were just on that lever, you know, where it could have been too much, but because there's so much else on offer here, I was able to kind of put it to the side. So, so going back to the good stuff though, besides Timeless, obviously, you know, Elohim, again, you know, love it when albums come, you know, right to the point, and you know, and you know, again, you know, like I wrote, like, oh, it's like a faster in tune with Finnish influences and more atonal chord decisions, you know, and I love that. That's a lot on offer for me. I love those kinds of sounds. I love that style of riffing, and I love that they mixed it with this more death and roll style in such a way where it kind of gave that, you know, sub genre like a little bit more cojones, you know what I mean? So yeah, so that's my go-to. You know, if anybody wants to check these out, you know, definitely Elohim and Timeless. And actually I like the song directly after Timeless too, Screaming and Phobia. I think Screaming and Phobia is a
Great
super
song.
strong track.
Yeah,
there's a riff, man, at 2:30 in that song, but halfway through, man, it's just every time I'd be working and it would come on and I would just want to throw something, you know. And it was the same exact moment in the song, and I, like I said, it's about 2.5 minutes in. When you hear it, you'll know, and you'll be like, ah, yes, that's what metal's all about. Good stuff.
yeah. Well, I guess I'll start off with the positives. I mean, the opening track, Elohim, perfect leadoff track, fierce and exact blasting, eases off the gas a bit to embrace solid and memorable riffs. I love the complex yet flowing structure. Then they return again to the blasting, bring the front around again. Very cool song, very energetic, great mission statement for the rest of the album. I think Kellen mentioned Towards the Endless Throne. I put just a crushing track, nice aggressive mix of punk and blast beats. That's kind of like where, you know, Swedish death metal's past and current state at the time come together. Very good. Screaming and Phobia is another favorite song. I love the energy that falls into the blasting beats and potent hook-oriented riffs. I mean, this Kenneth England, he's a great drummer, man. The production, the full production of the drums makes this a fun listen because you can hear everything he's doing. It's great. Soul Incest. There's another favorite. It's an interesting middle break on it with a syncopated note playing with the other guitar accenting every other beat like a stabbing crunch in a simple chord progression over the top. It's a very cool and disorienting vibe. Indication, Vitalis, clean bass cuts nicely, uniquely dissonant riffs yet again boil out of more traditional 1, 2, 3, 4 style chord progressions. Very cool. The punk songs I enjoy. My least favorite song, and this is a guy that I like industrial. I own a lot of industrial. I like Godflesh. I like industrial, but this here just kind of seems like a Swano moment to me. They made the drums sound very electronic and punch and feel for that industrial vibe, but random lyrics, short and pointless. It kind of feels like a filler piece to me. The Final Conflict, the last metal song on the record, it's an okay song, but they're losing the intensity here. They're out of solid ideas. It kind of seems like a lot of like they're getting towards the end of their writing circle, and the song just doesn't have the intensity that the beginning of the album does.
It's not the most minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the most effective metal closer. And then they followed up with Splenium for Nyktophobia, which is just a farted out synth thing. It's just and really, if I have one complaint about this record, I would say it's the pacing or the track listing. They could have fiddled around with the track listing. They could have dispersed this stuff a little differently. They put the punk songs really close to each other. I don't know. I would have tracked it differently. I would have paced the tracks differently, I guess. I think it would have been a little more effective. The Final Conflict song, it just was not a good closer for the album. They could have went out on something. They could have went out on Screaming and Phobia and put the Tired song a little bit closer to the middle and put a little more distance between the two punk songs. I think it would have been paced a lot better. But having said that, it's really a great record. I mean, I've got 2 copies of it. So, I mean, it's just the way it goes. But yeah, that's it. I think everybody in Judgment, final thoughts. No, we got one more to do. Jim, Judgment, final thoughts.
Well, it's in my Dark Descent cart right now.
Yep.
So yeah, that's my final judgment. Yeah, I think there's far more good than bad here on the plate, and you know, by the end of the record, yeah, it starts to peter off those last couple of it's like the Godflesh attempt, and then the weaker Final Conflict porno song, and then the crazy Nintendo horror movie, Gremlins soundtrack thing, but there's like 10 other songs that are awesome. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, my feeling on this was, who cares? You know what I mean? There was so much more to go. And I, like I said, I think it was the brevity of the songs and the number of the songs. And, obviously they like Crust, they did the G-Anks cover, which I agree, Kellen, that's a great cover. I usually hate covers. I'm just not a cover fan. I love this cover. I mean, that cover is just crushing. It makes me want to hear the band. I've never heard of them before, but now I want to check them out. But yeah, I think there's far more on offer. You're not going to regret picking this up if you're a fan of 90s Swedish death metal. And I actually think that it may not hang with the greats, but man, it's right up there. And I agree also with Kellen. I keep bringing his name up. It's me and you tonight, Kellen. But if they had been more prolific, if they had stayed the course, if what was his name again, Mark whatever, the guy from Catatonia, it's maybe giving them more attention, maybe they would have done a little bit more. I think they're playing out again now or something. But anyway, yeah, definitely, this is an 8.5 for me. I'm gonna buy it. I think it's great.
Kellen,
I liked it. Outside of that, like, what do I want to say here? In terms of adding to my collection, like, are there currently, for me personally, like other probably classic Swedish death metal records that I would grab before it? Yes.
Sure. Fair enough.
Right. But if what I would say is, like, down the road, if I get that craving where it's like I don't have enough classic 90s Swedish death metal records in my collection, like I'm happy to have heard this one, right? It'll be like it's sort of an uncovered sort of secret that otherwise no one else is really going to know if I wasn't exposed to hanging out with, the likes of you fine gentlemen and
Old farts.
all your tastes. Yes.
Grandpa death metal, whatever.
But but I think more than anything, I hope, like, I guess coming away from it, my understanding and appreciation for the time period and the geographic contribution to the genre is probably grown a little bit, right? Like, in terms of all the different sounds that were coming out of the region and the nuances and slight sort of variation in between bands, I think was what I really gained out of this record. So it's a great listen. If people are all about Swedish death metal, add this to your list. Absolutely.
TJ.
Yeah, I'm with Jim. And that's like I said, my criticisms of the weird little tracks don't really diminish from the value of the overall record, and I agree with that. I mean, was it 14 songs? It's only 38 minutes. You got maybe 6 minutes of like, hey man, check out this weird thing we wrote, and then back to business. I definitely would give this record 4 out of 5 stars, 2 big thumbs up, B+, bordering on an A. It's a cool record. It's and it's like, like with Kellen's point, it's like in the pantheon of the bands of the time, it's like, would this be a go-to? It's like not necessarily, but for me, it's like I said, I thought I had a copy of this, and I desperately need to reorganize my collection, but it's a mess. But I could have, because Marty brought up, I'm like, oh, I've got that, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I don't, but I knew I was familiar with it, and I definitely want to have it in the stacks here, because it's just it's a gem that gets overlooked, I think, and it could have definitely could have been more, but it's a cool record, and it's definitely worth your time.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I heard it, I think my buddy Brian put it on a tape for me. This was a wheelhouse that I was in. I love the Swedish death metal stuff. I love it. I still love it to this day. And this just fit perfectly, aside from wishing it had a different track listing. It's a great record. And obviously I own 2 copies of it. So it's, it kind of ranks up there with like Therions of Darkness and Beyond Sanctorum. I mean, those 2 albums are also kind of overlooked Swedish classics as well. It all sits in that wheelhouse for me, and it's just it's cool Swedish underground that has just as much quality as the big bands, the big guys from the scene. But yeah, and that's it for this week. Thanks again. We had a great time with this one, I think, and I don't know who's picking next. We didn't clarify that.
Well, it's one of those guys.
Yeah, it's one of those 2. Jim just picked.
Yeah.
I think it's Kellen.
So it was Jim. Then TJ got his revenge. And yeah. So okay. All right. Well, hopefully all of you hate this record. Here we go.
I do. I don't know.
Okay. This is a Witch Hazel.
TJ will like this one. He will like this one. It's stoner rock.
With these, yeah, I'm familiar with these guys.
Witch Hazel, Pentecost.
All right. I like the name.
I used it on a zit once. Stings.
Oh my god.
Pentecost. There it is. For next week. Witch Hazel Pentecost. Yeah, that's it. Friday coming up. There might be another review by Friday. We'll see if I get time to get it edited in time. But Majesties, Tanner and Carl from Majesties will be on Friday's episode, and we will be interviewing the band, and then going into talking about our favorite Swedish melodic death metal bands that influenced Majesties, all that fun stuff. It should be a
Rules.
fun episode. And
Got my copy. Mm.
did you get it yet?
I
it
did,
come?
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and in fact, the review that's coming up, it will be for Majesties, and Ben did it. So I'm hoping to get it. Maybe I'll get it edited tonight. We'll see. But anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will be around Friday. We'll see you Monday for another review, and next Wednesday for Witch Hazel. Anybody have anything to add before we jump? Nope.
No.
We need a
What
catchphrase.
happened?
Just anything you have anything to add?
Yeah. Yeah. Excelsior! I don't know.
All right. With that, we're jumping. Everybody have a great one. We'll see you Friday. Cheers.